All right. Okay. This is where we have got to. So we've been through all the rows on the matrix for the cardio column. Hi, Chris.
Good afternoon, Professor.
So now we want to look at, now we've got an F, a frequency, we've got an intensity, we've got a time and a type, right, for cardio. So now a quick look at how do we progress that, right? Because the principle of progression is key if we want to continue to see improvement, all right? So it's the same idea that you would do probably automatically, particularly those of you that have been training for a long amount of time. But you wouldn't go into the gym and lift the same way every day for a year, right? You would change up that weight because you want to get stronger, right? Once you can lift that weight, then you need to increase the weight to go up and get more strong. Same with aerobic work and cardio work, right? So if we want to continue to see improved cardiovascular adaptations and fitness improvements, then we have to look at how we're going to change the program. Remember, what we're looking for is continued adaptation, really, right? So we want larger coronary arteries, we want increased levels of cardiac output, we want to try to bring down blood pressure, we want to improve blood cholesterol ratios, and also help with insulin sensitivity, especially if people are diabetic. All right, so how do I then progress, right? So our type of exercise, so our second T on our matrix, can progress from doing something relatively low impact, so walking, cycling, elliptical, swimming, to something that's more high impact, jogging, running, sprinting, running down hills, those kinds of ideas. The idea is we've got to continue to stress the system. Now, from a personal point of view, that isn't the area on the matrix that I like to progress in, right? I'm not interested particularly in changing from walking to jogging or running. I like walking, it doesn't hurt my back or my knees. I can get a good cardio workout. So, you know, that's not always, you don't have to change every layer, every element of the matrix to progress. Okay. So another choice, which is preferred particularly with beginners, so if you've got someone who's been relatively low active or even sedentary for quite some time, is to change up the duration, the time. Okay, so remember that we said that the kind of minimum amount of aerobics 3 to 5 days a week is 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, and I can do that 20 to 30 minutes in 10-minute blocks if I need to. Okay. So what you can do is take someone from doing their 10-minute blocks into maybe doing 2 15-minute blocks. And then you could take them to a 20-minute and a 10-minute block, right? And then maybe a full 30-minute block. So it's quite a simple way to add some progression in, right? Remember that the upper limit on our matrix should be 60 minutes, all right? The research doesn't suggest for health benefits or for regular fitness benefits, you know, unless you're an endurance athlete. More than 60 minutes a day doesn't really help. and it puts you at more risk for overuse injuries and things like that. Okay? So you can increase in 5 to 10 minute increments every 1 to 2 weeks over the first month to a month and a half. Okay? So that's a really good way to progress a beginner, all right, without making them very out of breath or very uncomfortable, right? Because if you make them uncomfortable, then the chances of them dropping out are quite high, okay? Then we have our intensity level, all right? So first we would tackle duration. Second, we would tackle intensity, usually. Or you may change from 3 days to 4 days. So you might alter up the frequency even. But we've got that range of intensity from 55 to 90% of our heart rate max. All right? Hopefully, your individual was healthy enough to be able to start at the lower end of the continuum, so we can increase their intensity from 55 to 60 or 62, right? We want to progress relatively slowly so that we avoid injury and fatigue, you know, and just kind of make, as I said, make people uncomfortable. Majority of people don't enjoy that feeling, right? Remember, you can't judge others who are in a normal, typical population by what you're willing to put your own body through, okay? So we're just looking at stressing the system, right? If I want to see progression, if I want to see adaptation, I have to stress the system, but I've got to judge how much I increase the stress by. All right, that's what becomes the clever bit. Okay, so column 2 on the matrix, right, is for resistance. Okay, and let's start with the F because that's the first row. I don't know why I put the PowerPoint around the other way. So frequency of training, right? How many times per week should we do resistance work? And it doesn't have to be weight training, right? So we'll talk about that in a minute. So what's interesting here is that the guidelines are not just how many times a week do I do strengthening work. It's how many times per week per muscle group do I do strengthening work, okay? So the recommendation here is 2 to 3 times per week per muscle group, all right? And we have then a couple of choices, all right? I can do a total body workout, all right? So I'm going to do my back, my shoulders, my arms, my chest, my legs, all in one day, right? And I'm going to do that twice a week. That means I get in and out of the gym, I only have to go twice a week, or I only have to do whatever I'm going to do for my resistance work, could be bands, right, twice a week, okay? Or another choice is one that you often see is a split routine, where we do some muscles on one day and other muscles on another day. Well, then you've got all kinds of things you can do, right? You can do back and shoulders one day. You can do chest and arms another day. You can do legs another day. Well, that's 3 sessions, but you've only done 1 set of muscle groups per session. So that means you have to replicate that. That means you have to train 6 times a week to meet the guideline. Okay? So it's important to understand that the guideline isn't how many days of the week, it's how many days of the week per muscle group. All right, because that split routine starts to take up a lot of time in your week, if that's the one you choose. Okay. Then we've got type. So type can be free weights, right? Barbells, dumbbells. It can be machines, so a leg extension or a leg curl or a leg press machine, right? It can be my body weight, so it can be press-ups or sit-ups or chin-ups, right? And I don't have to go to a gym then. Like, I have a chin-up bar, I look at it every day, I don't use it, but it's on my bedroom door. You know, you can buy relatively cheaply a chin-up bar that expands to jam into a door frame at home, right? So I don't have to go to a gym at all. I can do wall squats while I'm cleaning my teeth, right? There's all kinds of strength resistance work that I can do that doesn't involve going to a gym if I don't like that environment, or I can't afford that environment, or there isn't one nearby that is convenient, whatever, right? You can also use these rubber bands now, and there are all kinds of exercises that you can do with bands, okay? And you can buy the bands in different resistance. So as you get stronger, you can get a tighter band and it's harder to pull, right? So, and there are great workouts with bands for individuals who might not be stable to stand up and do resistance work. That doesn't mean you don't do resistance work with them. It means be creative and come up with another plan, right? Okay. So then the time or volume, often in, particularly in weight programs, they'll talk about the volume of exercise, but really the volume is the same thing as the amount of time you're going to have to spend doing the work, right? So the volume, the time, is going to depend on how many exercises you're doing that day, all right? The number of sets of each exercise that you're doing, the number of reps in each set that you're doing, and how much rest are you building in between sets and between exercises, okay? So there's a lot of variability there. You've got piles of things you can play around with a resistance program. The total amount of work, the total amount of time, the duration, the volume, right, changes the focus of the program. So if I'm doing lots of reps with a relatively light weight, then I'm going to be working muscular endurance. If I want to work power and strength, then I need to drop the reps down and increase the weight a little bit, right? So there's multiple different ways to manipulate the volume, the time. And there is a really great chart on page 391, which gives you a good idea of how do I set the program up depending on what the goal is. So they've got strength, they've got hypertrophy. So do I want to get bigger, right? Or do I want to get stronger, but I don't want to get bigger? Because those are two different things, okay? Power. Do I want to do power? Do I want to do muscular endurance? All right? So, depending on what my goal is, then there are very different ways of setting up the number of exercises, the number of sets, and the number of reps. All right? And we'll talk about intensity in a minute. So then, the other piece of the time element is the rest phase, right? So how much rest do I take between sets, between exercises, okay? So that, again, depends on what is it I'm trying to train, okay? If I make the rest period longer, then I'm going to allow my ATP PC system more time to recover and be ready for the next attempt, okay? So I decrease acidity in the muscle, and that decreases the risk of fatigue in the muscle, and so that's a good way to train if I want to train strength or power, right? Then I'm going to take rest phases that are somewhere around 2 minutes, maybe even up as high as 3 minutes. But if what I want to do is increase growth hormone and help with endurance work and hypertrophy, then I want less recovery period, right? So I'm only going to have a recovery of about 1 to 2 minutes, depending on whether it's a hypertrophy program or an endurance program, right? The endurance program, you want less rest because you need to push that muscle. It's not going to get any rest at all in an endurance event, right? If it's a hypertrophy program, you need a bit more rest so that you can push really hard on the next set. Right? So it just, again, the goal, remember we talked about at the beginning of the semester how important the goal is and how important intensity is, right? I have to know what the goal of the program is. The goal may be maintenance, right? It may be I want to get a little bit stronger and then I just want to tick over, right? I'm not interested in being Wonder Woman. So it's important to know what that goal is. And then, of course, we need to talk about intensity, because we say intensity is really key to achieve any of your goals. And intensity measures for resistance programs are very different than intensity measures for aerobic programs, okay? So for the anaerobic program, we measure intensity as a percentage of your max weight that you can lift, okay? So a 1 rep max is the measure of strength of a muscle group, okay? And so if I know what my 1 rep max is, I can do a percentage of my 1 rep max, and that's my intensity level, okay? So the higher the percentage, the more weight there would be, and the less reps I would be doing. All right? Now, that's okay if you're working in a good gym with safety equipment, and you've got someone who really knows what they're doing, right? You might want to run a 1RM squat or a 1RM bench press, okay? But often that's not who we're working with. And a 1RM is a very risky assessment tool. Very, very easy to get hurt doing a 1RM. So oftentimes people will use a 3RM instead of a 1RM and then take a percentage of that 3RM. Okay? So both of those are usable. Personally, I wouldn't use them with a beginner or someone that doesn't have lifting experience, all right? I would hang on to those to people that kind of know what they're doing. So then what do I do with someone else? So I could do 100% of an 8RM, right? So we could work out what their 8RM is, and instead of doing a percentage, that's their weight for that exercise. So that's a way around that in the weight room. If I'm using my body weight, then again, it's 100% of my body weight is the intensity, right? I can't chop my leg off to make myself 10 pounds lighter, so I am moving whatever body weight I am. Okay? So then again, we come to this progression idea. Once we've given the initial program or the initial prescription, and this individual is adapting, and that weight or that number of reps is starting to feel easy, now what do I do? Right? What's the best way to progress? Right? So we want, one way is to increase the volume, right? But if I increase the volume, I have to decrease the intensity a little bit and then build the intensity back up. Or I can keep the volume the same and increase the intensity. Now, if I'm doing body weight work, right, that means that I get to a point where I have to start wearing wrist weights or ankle weights or a weighted belt or a weighted vest, right, or a backpack full of textbooks, okay? So just because I'm doing body weight doesn't mean I can't increase intensity. Although, again, often people are doing body weight because they don't want to get massively stronger, so I can always increase the number of sets or the number of reps in there. All right? And then another really easy way to progress a resistance program is to decrease that rest period, right? Shorten it down a little bit, and that makes them work harder. You know, they're not fully recovered before the next set. Most common is to increase intensity in a typical weight program, right? In a typical program, we bung more weight on the bar. But we got to start thinking outside the box. Not everyone you're going to work with is going to be an athlete. Probably, right? So what are my other options there? So I don't put the person off and they don't not come back, right? That would be bad. We want to keep them returning. Questions? Okay, so your matrix then, you should have the first two columns filled in on your matrix now. All right? Column number 3 is for flexibility. All right? And we have a lot less research on flexibility than we do on cardio and resistance. But there's enough to have an idea of something we should put in every box. All right? So my frequency, right? The recommendation is 2 to 3 days minimum per week, up to every day. All right? If you get the intensity right, it's kind of hard to overdo flexibility. And particularly if you are going to work with athletes, depending on what sport they're playing, they are notorious at not doing their flexibility work, right? So they're forever getting hurt because they didn't do their flexibility work. Now, if you're working with a gymnast or a diver, you don't have to worry about it. It's part of the game, right? But if you're working with a soccer player, okay, or a football player, getting them to do their flexi stuff is like pulling teeth, okay? But then they get a groin strain. How many times do you hear that soccer players have a groin strain? Because they didn't do their flexibility work, all right? And there's a difference in my book, and this is an opinion I've held for a long time. Not everybody agrees with me, but there is a difference. And it's based on my experience and my background because of dancing and gymnastics. There's a difference between stretching and flexibility work, right? Stretching is something you do in the warm-up, pre the exercise, to get ready for the range of motion that you need to perform. Flexibility work is specifically geared to increase that range of motion, right? So, as I said, not everyone agrees with me. I don't see that distinction very often in textbooks, but I think it's an important one because you don't do flexibility in the warm-up. You do stretching, in my view, right? So the guidelines for flexibility are that you do 2 to 3 days minimum per week, up to every day. Which is good because it's something, it's low intensity, right? You can get your person, your athlete, your students, whoever it is, to do some flexibility work on their day off, right? If you want to. Doesn't have to be daily. Okay. Intensity for flexibility is specific, but it's specific to the person being stretched, not to you, right? So the intensity is the point of tension, all right? So if you are stretching someone, you've got to be very experienced to be able to tell where that point of tension is. Most of the time, it's best to rely on the individual to tell you, okay, that hurts now, right? So the point of tension counts as the intensity level. The time, so the recommended time, and again, this is for athletes maybe who don't need masses of range of motion, or for a regular training program, right? This is nowhere near enough time for a gymnast or a dancer or a diver. I can tell you that for now, right? 60 seconds total per stretch, okay? And so you can do 10 seconds by 6, or you could do 20 seconds by 3, or you could do 30 seconds by 2, or you can do the whole minute at one go. All right? Again, from my personal experience, not from the literature, 10 seconds won't achieve diddly squish, in my view. But what do I know? Type. Okay, type gets really interesting with flexibility. Okay, the safest kind of flexibility work, stretching work, is static stretching. All right, where you take the stretch to the point of tension and you stay there and you count 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute, whatever you're doing. And then you come out, okay? That's the safest form of doing flexibility, range of motion work, and it's certainly where I would start with beginners, okay? Another option that gets a lot of media nowadays is dynamic flexibility, all right? Again, I'm not sure that I would use dynamic flexibility, because dynamic flexibility is really bouncing, right? So it's these toe taps that we do, something like that, right? Or arm circles, right? That's dynamic flexibility, right? In my view, most resources would say do not use ballistic stretching methods. So a ballistic stretching method means I take it to its range, right? And then I bounce past the range. That's ballistic stretching. I wouldn't do that with anybody. You'll see gymnasts do it, you'll see dancers do it, but they know their bodies very well, and stretching is something they've done every day of their life for the last 15 years, right? So they understand how much bounce to put into that. I wouldn't use it with anybody else, okay? So typically ballistic stretching gets thumbs down to be used with most populations. Dynamic flexibility is really dynamic stretching. It's something I think that you would use in a warm-up, like arm circles, right? But I'm not taking my arm to its outside point of range of motion, right? I'm working within my range of motion to stretch and warm up the joint and the muscles and the connective tissue. Okay? So I personally am yet to be convinced that dynamic flexibility work is a good plan. I don't read enough in this area. I will admit to that straight away. So it's quite possible that there's information out there that I'm not aware of. Okay? If you ever find any of it, please send it to me, because you know, the more I know, the better job I can do helping you guys. But I think when they talk about dynamic stretching, that's a warm-up activity. That is not a range of motion increasing activity. Right? Next one is really interesting, PNF. You might have heard of PNF. It's really good to call it PNF because it stands for Proprio-Neuromuscular Facilitation, which is way too big, 3 long big words, right? PNF is a really interesting concept because it uses what we know about Golgi tendon organs and muscle spindles, all right? And it incorporates that information into a flexibility program. So when you do PNF, it's much easier to do it with a partner than it is on your own, all right? And what you would do is, so say the table is my partner, all right? So let me do this one because I know you can see this table. Say the table is my partner and we're doing a hamstring stretch, all right? So my partner holds my leg and I contract my hamstrings as hard as I can, squeeze, 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 and then I relax and they lift my leg a little bit. All right? So then we go squeeze, 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 relax, and they lift my leg a little bit. All right? So what's happening here, if we go back to our sensory receptors, right? Remember the Golgi tendon organ recognizes tension or force in the muscle and instigates a relaxation reflex, right? So if I squeeze as hard as I can and then I relax, and as I'm relaxing you push, and I've got a reflex relaxation going on as well, it's a really good way to increase range of motion. Muscle spindle point. Muscle spindles respond to speed of stretch, length of stretch, right? So when I squeeze, 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 and I relax, and you push, you don't push. Right? Because then the muscle spindle is going to initiate a contraction, and we end up having an injury. Right? So I squeeze, 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 squeeze. I relax, you push slowly and gently so that we don't set the muscle spindle off. Right? Brilliant stretching technique. It's a really, really excellent range of motion technique. Right? You've got to have people who know what they're doing. If you're going to use it with your students or your athletes, you have to explain to them exactly what is going on. The person being stretched has to have control, right? It's like those naughty sex toy things, right? There has to be an out. Okay, enough now, right? Because when you're doing the pushing, you don't know what that feels like for that person, right? Okay? All right, column number 4 then is relatively new, and it is called neuromotor. And it's recommended particularly if you are working with older individuals, but also very beneficial for everybody, really. And if you're working with athletes, the kinds of exercises that you find under neuromotor are the sorts of drills that you would do for foot speed and things like that. So you may already have those built in to a program. Just in they're not called column 4 neuromotor, right? So neuromotor is recommended for 2 to 3 days per week or more. So we have very, very, very little literature on how the neuromotor column should be constructed right now, all right? So generally 2 to 3 days a week, but you could do a bit more than that if you wanted to, okay? Intensity, no idea. It hasn't been isolated what that intensity measure would be and how you would apply it, okay? The time recommendation, again, is a bit wishy-washy. We're not entirely sure, but somewhere around 20 to 30 minutes per day, per session. And then the type. So balance work, agility work, coordination work. So agility ladders, or running around a cone, or standing on one leg, right? Tai Chi is a great neuromotor. Yoga can count for neuromotor and for resistance, often, depending on what kind of yoga it is, right? So you could kill 2 birds with 1 stone in certain circumstances, okay? So now we have our 4 columns and 4 rows. We've got our nice matrix, our grid, okay? And that is the basis for basically any program you need to write for anyone except a serious endurance athlete. They would be off this chart. But the resistance work would work for the endurance athlete, right? Okay? All right, where are we? 10 minutes. Eeks. Okay. A quick review of interval training. So like the fad, the current kind of interest in HIIT programs. HIIT programs are generally a form of interval training. The concept is that I can do more work, so the intensity is greater, when the exercise is interspersed with a rest phase, all right? Greater intensity leads to greater fitness, and the research actually indicates that in certain circumstances we can increase peak VO2 to be higher than where it plateaued on a steady state training, right? So we said that VO2 max is genetic, and after 12 weeks worth of aerobic training it's going to plateau and it doesn't improve within a, it's got a little range, but it doesn't improve. But they found that if you take that person with that plateau and you put them on the appropriate interval training, it actually will edge up a little bit more. So that's quite an interesting concept, I think. So it's a preferable way to try to increase the total amount of work that your individual is doing with the least amount of strain and fatigue involved. Okay? So for general fitness, they would recommend 1 or 2 times a week. For athletes, depending upon their sport, 2 to 4 times a week. You don't do interval training every day, right? The intensity is too high, okay? So then intensity would be the percentage of the best time for the length of run that you're doing perhaps, right? Or a percentage of heart rate max. So if I'm working my ATP PC system because I'm working with a sprinter or a jumper, right? Then they're going to do 90 to 100% of their best time. So if I'm having them do 20-yard sprints, right? They've got to go all out. ATP PC. Right? Remember at the beginning of the semester when I said it was really important that we understood the energy systems because everything builds, right? If I want to train glycolysis, so I'm training an athlete whose event lasts between 25 seconds and 2.5 minutes, okay? Then I'm going to have them go at 80 to 95% of their best time for the length of sprint. If I'm working an aerobic athlete, they're going to go 75 to 85%. Right? So the duration, again, depends on which system, what kind of athlete, what's the goal, right? I can do 5 to 10 second sprints. Okay. I can do 30-second to 2-minute sprints if it's a glycolytic athlete. I've got to do more than 2 minutes if it's an aerobic athlete. All right? What's good for the day? Right? What particular part of their event am I working on today? Because if it's an endurance athlete, don't forget they may have to sprint to the line to beat the guy that's sitting on their shoulder. So I don't not want to work sprinting just because they're an endurance athlete. Vice versa, right? If I'm a sprinter, I still need to have aerobic stamina because I've got to sprint 5 or 6 times in the day to get to the final. Number of intervals. So what are the fitness goals? Okay, how many reps per set am I doing? How many sets am I doing? All right. What's the rest period? Because the rest period is key to make it interval training, right? So there's a couple of ways I can do that. I can use recovery heart rate. So if I'm working with someone your age, right, a college student, 20 to 29, then they're going to do their run piece or jump piece or whatever it is you have them doing, right, in the interval, and then you're going to wait until their heart rate drops to 140 and then they have to go again. If you're working with a 30 to 39-year-old, you wait until it drops to 130. A 40 to a 49-year-old, you wait till it drops to 120. A 50 to a 59-year-old, 110, etc., etc., right? You take 10 beats per minute off for every 10 years. Okay? So that's a really easy way to set it up, assuming they have a heart rate watch, right? Or you can do a work to rest ratio. So like you can do a 1 to 3, okay? Or a 1 to 2, or a 1 to 1. And then the last element is what kind of rest are you giving them? All right? Is it a passive, i.e. they're standing still or sitting down? Right? You would only use a stationary, what I would call a stationary rest period, if you're working with that high intensity, short-term intervals, right? If you're working with someone that's either towards the latter half of the glycolytic stage or into the aerobic area, then you're going to give them an active rest. So that means they're going to run, and then they're going to walk or jog. And then they're going to run, and then they're going to walk or jog. Right? Okay, so this slide, I always think is a little amusing because it just seems so obvious. But what's the structure, the overall global structure of this physical activity or exercise session? All right. So 3 elements typically. Element 1 is going to be the warm-up. Right? And most of us are pretty good at doing a warm-up. Right? So that is twofold. It works to warm us up physiologically and also get us prepared psychologically for what's coming. Right? It can be general, so it can be, you know, run 2 laps and then come back, but you're going to do jumping or throwing, right? Or it can be sport specific. So we're going to dribble the ball up and down the field 2 times, and then we're going to do some stretching, right? So be careful here with the stretching. It's not, in my view, flexibility training. It's stretching. It's part of a warm-up, right? But that should be after you've done the body temperature raise first, right? So you do gallops or skips or runs or whatever you're going to do. That has to happen first. Then you put your stretching portion in at the end of the warm-up once the body is warm. So again, in my personal view, I would not use PNF in a warm-up, right? In a warm-up, I would use static or dynamic. And remember some of the information we talked about. I think we've done that. Have we done that already? Talked about that some stretching beforehand, static stretching, might decrease power if it's too close to the actual event time. Then part 2 is the body of the exercise. So that's your cardio or your resistance or your serious flexibility training, right? And then the bit we never do, never, part 3, right? Part 3 is the cool down. How often do we do the cool down? Rarely, right? We're pretty bad. Very good at the warm-up because you know full well if you don't do the warm-up, the body of the exercise is going to hurt, right? So the warm-up happens. The cool-down bit, we get to the end of the body of the exercise, we look at our watch, we've got to go, oh crap, I've got to get back to the office. And we don't do the cool-down, right? But the cool-down is physiologically important because it helps the body begin to come back to rest phase, right? It prevents blood from pooling in the lower extremities, all right? And it will not necessarily prevent muscle soreness, but it might limit muscle soreness a little bit, all right? And it brings blood acid levels back down, which aids recovery. So this extra 10 minutes that we stick on the end of a walk or some gentle stretching or maybe, you know, slow skip rope, whatever your choice is, this is actually a very important part of the program, but it's the piece that we rarely do. At least I'm guilty of rarely doing it. Okay? All right. Well, I was going to go over the assignment that is opening up today, but I'll have to go over that at the beginning of Friday. So I will open up the guidelines and things, and then maybe on Friday you'll have questions on how to, pardon me, how to approach that. Okay?
Okay.
All right, any quick questions on any of that, Chris, or are you okay?
I'm good.
Does it make sense?
Yeah.
There's a lot of information, and
Just got to read.
yeah, there's a lot of information here, and it's the fun bit, right? This is the hands-on. This is what makes a really good strength and conditioning coach or a really good personal trainer, right? Is understanding how do I manipulate all these variables for this individual, right? That's where the science comes in, okay? All right, so Friday we will finish this chapter, okay? I'll go over the guidelines for the assignment that opens up today, so have a look at it, start thinking about it, bring questions on Friday, and have a good rest of your afternoon.
Same to you.
All right, bye.